So yeah, things didn't exactly go as planned when it came to upgrading this thing. So as you can probably judge from the state of the table, I kind of abandoned this project, and I should probably take better care of my stuff rather than just leaving it all strewn about like this. But the point is that this thing sucked to upgrade. I absolutely hate it. I never want to touch it again. And it's not that I failed to upgrade it necessarily, because 2 out of the 3 upgrades that I wanted to do worked, and it did actually help improve the performance of the computer, but the real crucial one didn't work, and was just a complete mess, and I did technically get it to kind of work, but the performance wasn't anywhere near what I was expecting. It's a long story, so this is not going to be the traditional NTG video. I'm basically going to, from this point on, switch over to like a voiceover over all the old footage that I filmed while I was upgrading this, and it's going to be sort of an analysis of what happened and everything that went wrong.
Alright, so before we start analyzing what all happened with the upgrades, I kind of want to just address a couple things about the original video. So I kind of titled the video and heavily implied that that this was the experience that like most people had in 1999. That's not really true. I guess it really depended on like what system you had and what the system was intended for. Obviously, some people had a worse experience, some people had a much better experience. It was sort of a generalization, and I did kind of clickbait it a little bit. So, yeah, that's probably, the system is not the most representative of what most people would have had in, back at the time. Of course, like everything with technology and PC hardware, it vastly varies on what you had. So yeah, I just wanted to clear that up a little bit. My intention wasn't really to make this seem like it was, like, all PC gaming was horrible back then, but I guess it did kind of come off that way, so sorry about that one. So I had 3 major upgrades in mind for this PC. RAM, CPU, and GPU. So I decided to start with the one that I thought would be the easiest, which was the RAM, and I was right. It was pretty simple. I decided to upgrade the machine from its original 64 megabytes of RAM to 128. I know in the original video I kinda said that 64 megs was a bit small for the time. What I meant by that really was it's small for Windows 98 to an extent. What I'm getting at is Windows 98 is kind of a memory hog due to a bunch of stuff. That makes it a lot less efficient than like Windows 95, say, was. 64 megs of RAM would have been reasonable at the time, reasonable enough. What I was getting at really is just that a memory upgrade would help out Windows 98 a lot. So I upgraded it to 128 megs, and it did help. It didn't make like a massive improvement or anything, but overall the system felt a little bit more responsive. It didn't have to swap stuff to the hard drive quite as often. So if you're going to build a 98 machine, I do recommend at least 128 megs of RAM, just because there's not really a reason to put less in it unless you're going for like a specific time period or something like that. But yeah, 64 megs of RAM, not horrible in Windows 98, but definitely could do better, so that's why I upgraded it. And so like I expected, the RAM upgrade went without a hitch. It was very basic. It didn't complain about it at all, and went very smoothly, thankfully. This was about the easiest thing I did to the system. Alright, so the next thing I wanted to upgrade was the CPU. Now, there really isn't too much more you can go beyond than a K62 in a Socket 7 system like this, because that was pretty much the last generation of CPUs that was really made for Socket 7. However, there is the K62 Plus. Now, the K62 Plus is a pretty interesting CPU. It's based on the K63 Plus, which itself was basically a die-shrunk K62. I believe it went from 250 nanometers down to 180. And the reason for that was this was actually designed as a mobile CPU. So you might be thinking, okay, it's a mobile CPU, it runs less hot, a little bit less power. How's that really much of an upgrade? Because we're already starting to reach the limits of clock speed on Socket 7. Well, the K63 Plus and the K62 Plus, they built in L2 cache just onto the die, as opposed to it just being on the motherboard, and that dramatically helped speed up the performance, and it's actually way better than the regular K62. Now, I wanted to put in a K63 Plus, however, I couldn't find one for a reasonable price, and the main difference between the 2 Plus and the 3 Plus is that the 3 Plus has 256K of L2 cache, and the 2 Plus has 128K. So there is a difference, but I figured, the 2 Plus be good. Now, you couldn't really buy these CPUs back then. They weren't supposed to be sold to consumers, but there were various ways you could get your hands on them if you tried hard enough. So this wasn't an unrealistic upgrade at the time, but it probably wouldn't have been very high on the list for most people to do. But it did help the performance a substantial amount. Now, I couldn't just drop in the CPU and expect it to work, because there's two main reasons with this motherboard. Number one is the voltage, and number two is the BIOS. Let's start with the voltage. These CPUs, the Plus CPUs, are supposed to be run at 2 volts. This motherboard, most Socket 7 boards, will only go down to 2.1 volts. Now, that seems like a lot of voltage by modern CPU standards, but back then CPUs were a bit more tolerant to different voltages. And since this is basically a K62 that was die shrunken, and these were pretty popular with overclocking, putting in a little bit of extra voltage probably wasn't going to hurt things that much. And so since this is a 500 megahertz CPU to begin with, and I wanted to overclock it anyways, actually I tried to get it to run at 600 megahertz, but it didn't work. So I had to do 550 megahertz. So I decided to overclock it anyways, so the extra voltage didn't really end up mattering in that case, since I might have needed to overvolt it anyways. Is whatever. It's the voltage. It was not a huge deal, just something to be aware of. The second problem that we had to overcome was the BIOS. Now, I thought the BIOS might be what killed this upgrade, and it somehow ended up not being. So the BIOS that was on the motherboard originally didn't support the CPU properly. It would boot it, but it didn't know how to properly detect it, and it would fail to post past, it wouldn't boot the OS. It just kind of locked up. However, I somehow managed to find a BIOS online somewhere. If I can find the link to it, I'll put it in the description, maybe show it on screen or something, but I managed to find a BIOS that was from a year, it was a year newer than the BIOS that was on there. I think the new BIOS is from late 2000. The original one was from 99. It actually supported the K62 Plus. I super did not expect it to work. I thought there's no way that this kind of crappy motherboard is going to support this mobile CPU that really was not supposed to ever be run on desktop motherboards. But somehow it did, and it actually worked fine, and the performance was actually good. This was surprisingly... I thought this was going to be the major roadblock in getting to upgrade, and I thought I was just going to have to drop it and just leave the original K62 CPU in there, which would have been fine. It would have worked with the graphics cards that I was planning to put in, but I definitely wanted the extra CPU horsepower, and I actually got it. This was definitely the big surprise of the upgrading, because I really did not expect it to work as well as it did. And finally, the last upgrade I wanted to do, and the most obvious one for gaming, is a graphics card upgrade. And this is where things ended up really falling apart with this machine. So the first problem we have to overcome when upgrading a graphics card is that there's no AGP slot. Very cheap motherboard, and a lot of cheap motherboards back then didn't have AGP slots. So we're limited to PCI graphics cards only. So that limits our selection a bit and also limits potential performance as well. So I managed to gather up 3 video cards that I thought would be a good candidate for this machine. The first one, an NVIDIA Riva TNT2 M64. Second one was a Matrox Millennium G450. And the third one was an ATI Radeon 7000. So naturally, I decided to go with the Radeon 7000, as it's by far the most powerful one out of the bunch. And it... this is where the weirdness of cheap computers back then kind of comes into play. I can't really explain why it kept doing this, because I tried literally everything. But after installing multiple different versions of the ATI driver, all the way from like the release drivers from when the card first came out up to like the very latest ones, the card would either freeze, or well, not the card, the entire computer would either freeze on boot, or it would freeze shortly after running a 3D application. Just, there was no rhyme or reason to it either. It would be either or. It didn't matter. It was completely random which one it was. I don't know why, but like, when I say I tried everything to get this to work, I mean I tried literally everything I could possibly think of. Every BIOS setting. I tried all 3 PCI slots. I tried, again, like I said, numerous versions of the driver. I just could not get the Radeon to work. So I was very disappointed, but I was like, okay, I'll move on to the Matrox, as that should be more powerful than the Riva TNT. The Matrox card had the exact same issue, except it seemed to crash even more frequently. And like I said, I tried everything. Everything I could possibly think of. I even went as far as to install Windows 2000 to make sure it wasn't some like Windows 9X weirdness problem. Did the exact same thing under Windows 2000. At that point, I thought, this, it was breaking me, frankly. And then, so I used the Riva TNT2 M64, and it works, usually. It will occasionally freeze, but it's like a 1 in like 15 maybe chance. From what I can gather, it happens far less frequently than the others. The problem is that I don't think the performance is anywhere near what it should be. Now, I know the TNT2 M64 wasn't a stellar card by any means. It's sort of a mid-range card from like 1999, and it also has to deal with the fact that it's on the PCI bus, which brings numerous limitations along with it, which I'm not going to get into. But I could be wrong about this, but based on what I've seen other TNT2 M64s and how they perform, it doesn't seem like this one is performing anywhere near where it should be, and I can't figure out why. Again, numerous different drivers, basically every setting. I'm thinking there's just something weird with this motherboard and like the chipset that's just doing something really weird with the PCI bus. And I can't figure it out. You know, I even tried disabling the onboard graphics using a jumper on the motherboard, and even once I did that, it didn't help the performance any, and it also didn't help fix the other 2 cards either, just in case there was some weird conflict, I thought. But no, disabling it or enabling it, it made no difference. So yeah, this was the unexpected Achilles heel of upgrading this thing. I really did not expect the graphics card of all things to be the problem. I thought the CPU was going to be the biggest hurdle, but somehow the graphics card ended up being a problem. Anyways, I do have some benchmarks, and I'm going to show them now, and we'll kind of go over and analyze them, and they're not amazing, but it was technically an upgrade. So I made these bar graphs probably 2 months ago. So I I kind of forgot like what all the numbers are. So we're gonna be kind of looking at this together, and I hope this is all accurate because I don't really remember. I'm pretty sure this is all accurate based on what I wrote down in like my notebook when I did the benchmarking. So here's the first one. This is for DOS Quake. So 320 by 200. Okay, yeah. So blue is the original, purple is the upgraded, or magenta, whatever this color is. So 320 by 200, it was 64.7 on the original. We got it up to 81.9, which, yeah, you can definitely see that CPU upgrade is working a lot. That's a huge upgrade. Um, I imagine the video card may have helped slightly. That's a slightly better video card helping with DOS, but I think this is mostly the CPU doing it. So almost 82 FPS. Very nice. And at 640 by 480, there's not a huge difference. 19 FPS over 17.7, so it's like a 1 FPS improvement, really. All right, so Windquake, 320 by 200. Again, we see a similar increase in performance, all the way up to 68.8. So finally, I'd say Windquake. Um, it's justifiable to play Windquake over DOSQuake at that point because sure the FPS isn't quite as high, but yeah, you don't have to boot out into DOS and stuff, so there's a benefit. But this is something I honestly I don't remember why this is like this, but apparently the upgraded machine in 640 by 480 Windquake did worse than the original. Like I said, it's been a while since I did this, so I don't remember why this is. Let me look at my notes. Okay, yeah, my notes don't mention anything because I'm terrible at making notes. So apparently it's worse. Don't know why, just how it is. So here's GL Quake, and if you remember the original computer crashed, um, or well, it ran a very corrupted version of GL Quake and then it crashed. So this is the performance. So 320 by 240, 92.2, 640 by 480, 83, all the way up to 800 by 600, almost 70 FPS. So this is all very playable. The 1024 by 768 one dropping down to about 50 is a little suspicious. Not quite sure why, and you'll kind of see this is where the video card kind of comes into question, especially when we get to I think Quake 2 is where it really is obvious. But this is not that bad. It's certainly a big improvement over the original, which couldn't even play the game properly. But this, I'd say 800 by 600, and you're getting about the same FPS as like I think 320 by 200 in Windquake. So yeah, you could play this instead of Windquake if you wanted, but yeah, it's all up to your personal preference on which renderer you like. All right, so Quake 2 in software rendering, original on the left and upgraded on the right. This is at 320 by 240. So you can see the CPU upgrade again is making a fair bit of difference. It's actually we're actually over 30 FPS now, so you could actually play it in software mode if you really wanted to. I'm pretty sure this is with the screen size set to full. If you shrink the screen size down some, you can get this even higher. And if you like to play Quake 2 in software, hey, it's actually doable on this machine now. Where this before, there's not a huge difference between these two numbers, but it that extra like what 8 FPS does make a difference. So now Quake 2 and OpenGL is where everything just does not make sense to me. And this is where the graphics card really comes into question on what's causing the performance to be so bottlenecked. It could be the PCI bus, it could just be that the video card sucks, but I'm pretty sure it can get way better numbers in Quake 2 at 320 by 240. Like, there's got to be something else other than the video card itself being bottlenecked here, because I'm thinking it's something to do with the PCI bus, because like 320 by 240 should not be that difficult to run to the point where it's the exact same as 640 by 480. Now, to be fair, This is a massive improvement over the original. I mean, yeah, that's a pretty big improvement. But it all seems like it's very much bottlenecked, just all up here, and then over here is probably where the graphics card itself is becoming the bottleneck. So again, I'm thinking that's the PCI bus or something to do with this, just something to do with this computer in general. This, like I said, this thing is weird, but it is playable. It didn't feel too bad to play, I guess. Um, Definitely not as good as it could have been, but it is an upgrade. All right, so we can actually run Quake 3 now, which we couldn't do before. And I think this is the GOG version of Quake 3, if that means anything really. It might be slightly different performance, but this is at 512 by 384 at the lowest settings, 25.4 FPS. So it's not very competitive at all, and you could play it in a pinch, but it really isn't ideal, and it's not quite as good as I was hoping to get out of the machine. I was hoping to get like 30, 40 FPS at the lowest settings, but it is what it is. Like I said, this PC was very unpredictable. So I got Unreal and software rendering. As you can see, the CPU upgrade really didn't make a huge difference here. I was only like a 3 FPS improvement. Kind of hoping for more. Was kind of hoping to hit like 30 FPS, but Unreal is a very intensive game, and it might just not utilize the K62 Plus's architecture specifically well. I'm not sure. Most people, when they talk about Unreal, they're not talking about the software rendering. What everyone talks about when it comes to Unreal is Direct 3D, and this, I guess for some reason I didn't test. Well, I know I didn't test the original at 640 by 480 because I figured it was a pointless endeavor. I guess I didn't test the upgraded one at 320 by 200. Maybe there was some issue with it, I don't know, but it's an upgrade, especially when you consider that the resolution is double, over double, actually. Um, Still not great. Um, like an AGP version of this card, I'd expect to get well above 30 FPS at 640 by 480 in Unreal. I'd expect it to probably get closer to like 50, 60 most of the time. But again, I could be wrong about that, but again, there's some weirdness going on here because I feel like this should be way higher, even with a PCI graphics card. I just feel like it should be better. And then finally, we got 3D Mark 99 Max, and see the CPU score increased quite a bit, about 1,000 points almost. So that's a fairly nice improvement. And the 3D Marks itself actually is a massive improvement. That's almost like a 4 times improvement. So definitely was an upgrade here, but again, this is a synthetic benchmark, so take that for what it is. I mean, we already looked at the games, so it's not very if you looked at this, you'd think, "Oh wow, it's like so much better." And it technically was in a lot of the games, but it wasn't as good as I was hoping it was going to be. So that's going to do it for this video. It definitely didn't turn out the way I wanted it to. Yeah, sorry if this video was a little bit boring. I really didn't know how else I was going to present this because it was such a mess, and I had footage and all this other stuff from like months ago that I just had no idea how to present. So this is it. Gonna make better content in the future. This is just kind of I wanted to get this out of the way so I can move on with other videos. So that's why I made it, and I did kind of, I think I promised in the original video that I was going to upgrade it. Maybe I didn't. Maybe I didn't mention that, but regardless, I wanted to just, yeah, I just wanted to get this out of the way. So yeah, anyways, thank you for watching. Have a good one.